Hi everyone, my name is Richard Baskeyfield and I'm the P1 tutor here at Phoenix Financial Trading. I'm here today to talk about some potential areas that could come up in the December 2014 exam sitting. Firstly, I'd just like to say about the P1 exam. The exam itself covers a wide range of topics. Now the syllabus for P1 is actually slightly smaller than other P-level papers. So I just want to stress first of all that students should be aware that although I am going to pass across some potential areas to come up in the exam, question spotting on this particular paper is very dangerous, as many areas of the syllabus could be tested in your paper. Rather than sort of saying what's going to be in each and every question, which would be very difficult to do, I'm just going to give a broad idea of some potential areas from each of the three main topics in P1. So I'll talk us through some key areas from corporate governance, some key areas about risk, and then finally some key areas of what I think will come up in terms of ethical theories. So if we start off by looking at corporate governance, some areas that have not appeared in a number of sittings in corporate governance, the first area would include the roles of the chairman and the roles of the CEO, so we should be aware of what these roles are, and also more importantly, why these roles have to be separated according to corporate governance. Another area which hasn't been tested for a number of sittings is the actual board structure, this being the differences between a unitary board structure and a two-tier board structure. So again, you should be aware of what these two board structures are, the differences, and also their advantages, because you might need to apply this to a scenario about how it could impact a business if they choose to go down the route of another board structure. Third area I would say on corporate governance is stakeholders. Now stakeholders hasn't been tested for a number of sittings, so students should be aware of how to firstly identify stakeholders. There's actually a really good article on the ACCA website. I think it's the very first article. I say the first article. It's at the very bottom of the list. It was the first article that was published. It's called All About Stakeholders Part 1 and All About Stakeholders Part 2. And in this article, the examiner talks about the different classifications that you can have for stakeholders. So you might be asked to identify stakeholders from an internal or external point of view. It might be an active or a passive point of view. And then that could easily be rolled into, once you identify the stakeholders, you then need to map them. This would be used, you would use here Mendelow's framework, so you need to map the interests of the stakeholders and then potentially decide how you're going to respond to these stakeholder claims. Another key area of P1 is risk. Potential areas for risk this sitting include the risk committee, and also the roles of the risk manager. As a student, you should be aware of what the risk committee actually does, what the objectives are, how it assists the boards in identifying risk and advising on the risk profile, and also the role that the risk manager has within this board structure. What the risk manager does in terms of the role in the risk committee, and also what the risk manager's responsibilities are in terms of the operational side. Second area I would say for risk would be talking around strategic and operational risks. These risks you should be aware of what impact they have on a business. So strategic risks obviously impact the whole of the business, operational risks are lower level. I'd also sort of add on to this talking around risk diversification. Once we identify risks, how can we potentially diversify those risks within an organisation? The last thing I would say with risk that comes in line with risk would be internal controls. Now internal controls are tested in pretty much every single P1 exam. It falls hand in hand with risk, because once you identify a risk, the next process is then, well, how will I reduce this risk? We'd have to put controls in place to mitigate those risks. So internal controls, I would be aware of what the objectives of internal controls are, and also what are the management's responsibilities towards internal controls. What do the executive directors have in terms of their responsibilities, and also what do non-executive directors have in terms of their responsibilities. Lastly, I would just also like to mention about ethics. There's 3 key areas, as far as I'm concerned, that could potentially be tested in this sitting. Now, in the last sitting, there was actually no real core areas that were asked about ethical theories. They did have the professional code of ethics in there, but not so much on the side of ethical theories. So the 3 key areas that could be tested this sitting are absolutism and relativism. So students should be aware of the differences between these 2 theories. They should be ready to maybe justify somebody's actions in the exam, or maybe assess their beliefs from these 2 different ethical viewpoints. Another area is Gray, Owen and Adams' 7 positions on a company's corporate social responsibility. So again, you should be aware of these 7 positions. You may be asked to put a director, or a director might express their view in the exam, and you have to place them in one of these 7 positions. Third area that could potentially come up this side, or this sitting should I say, is the AAA model, the American Accounting Association. This is a 7-step model that a company can use when deciding on some sort of ethical situation. So you should all be aware of those 7 questions, be ready to answer those 7 questions, and I would place extra stress on this. It is so important to plan your answer with this type of question. You're going to have 7 questions that you need to answer. You don't want to put all of your information in the first question. The last thing I'll just say is that there are 2 new areas that have been added into P1 this sitting. First area is on public sector governance. So again, I think students should be fully aware of this. There are 2 articles on the P1 website. They are the latest articles, they're at the top of the list, written by the examining team. So students should read up on these articles, be fully aware of these articles, and more importantly, be ready to answer a question on this area in the exam. Second area that's come up in P1 this time, or new area, is integrated reporting. Integrated reporting has come across all the P-level papers, but the main area, or the main paper it has come up on, is on P1. So students should be aware of the 7 guiding principles that's mentioned inside integrated reporting. They should also be aware of the different types of capital that's mentioned within this chapter. I would also say added on to integrated reporting is an area that has featured in many other P1 exams. It's not new, but it sort of falls in line with integrated reporting, and that is social and environmental data. You should be aware of the director's responsibilities towards social and environmental data, and also be aware of what an environmental audit is. What are the benefits of this type of audit, and how is it actually executed? For everybody who's sitting P1 this time, I wish everybody the very best of luck. Thank you for listening.